I'm Pepper Schwartz. I want to welcome you to Town Hall. I also know we have a lot of elected officials here today, too many to mention, so we're aware you're here and we are very grateful to you for coming this afternoon. In recent years, the decline of the middle class has been the stuff of headline news, and we've watched as corporate profits and CEO salaries soar, while workers' salaries are held back, stagnant wages, and an escalating cost of living, particularly in our own area. Over 20,000 United Food and commercial workers throughout the Puget Sound are in contract negotiations as we speak. And we think that this is a flashpoint for all these issues of trying to maintain what we've fondly known in our own American history as the middle class. And it's why we're here today to talk about whether or not Puget Sound is losing that middle class. We've also come together to show our support, to let the people in these negotiations know that they're not alone, and to look at the issues that are causing the disappearance of the middle class in Puget Sound. So let me introduce myself quickly. I'm a sociologist and a very stuffy college professor. You can see that. And I'm also an academic expert on sex and marriage. I'm the granddaughter of a union man. The Garment Workers Union in New York City was very important to my grandfather, Abraham. I'm the American-born child of immigrants. And I was lucky enough to have a good education and go to an Ivy League school and have all the kinds of things that this country is capable of giving. But to be honest, I think the most taxing and hardest education, and perhaps luckiest education I've come by, has been the hard lessons of learning how to maintain a personal life and family well-being in today's society. And that's what we're going to talk about today with a different frame. Today we're going to talk about how issues on the job affect people, how they affect families, and how they affect our communities and our society at large. So before we begin, we're going to take a bit of a look at a video that's been made especially for this meeting.
Grocery workers. They're our neighbors and friends.
How are you doing today?
They're more than 20,000 strong in Puget Sound, and they're a critical part of our communities. But neighborhood stores have become large corporate chains, and changing trends in the industry have been costly to workers.
You know, I graduated high school, I went to college, and I stayed in grocery because I really thought it was a great job. I loved what I did, I liked working with people, and you know what? It's almost 20 years now, and it's not the same.
Back when I started, it was a very, very good job to have. The health care, the benefits, the retirement. And over the years, it just has diminished.
Getting into the grocery industry was a good career choice if you looked at it when you're 19 years old as a career. People that are coming in today are not making enough money to be able to purchase their own home and have a future, the American dream.
United Food and Commercial Workers' current contract negotiation is a flashpoint of all the critical issues middle-class workers face everywhere. They're struggling with the escalating cost of living, housing, health care, the cost of child care. Transportation costs figure high because too often they can't even afford to live in the area where they work.
Sometimes I don't even feel like I'm middle class anymore. I feel like I'm lower class because the income just doesn't keep up with today's times.
My mom works a lot and she's a single parent, so it's pretty hard on her. So when she has her time off, that seems like a lot to me, almost like I'm going to Wild Ways or something, or Disneyland.
It's scary to think, am I going to have enough money to get the gas to get me through till payday? That's the sad reality.
I'm contemplating on starting to cycle back and forth to work, which would save me approximately $10 a day. It's very, very hard to raise a family off of the wage that I'm making.
The grocery business, they're just making mass quantities of profit and not sharing it with their employees.
If it wasn't for us, the workers, they would not be making the money that they're making.
And there's a lot of us out there that have worked for 20+ years. And it's time that they share their success.
Workers are forced to center their lives around schedules set only 3 days before the start of the work week. They can't call in sick or they'll lose a day's pay.
In 2005, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I had to go through 2 operations. Healthcare had changed, and it wasn't as good as it was, a year before. And it was just, I knew every day that I had to go to work, and I couldn't miss any time. I had 36 treatments of radiation, and I never called in sick or took any time off during that time, and I wish I had. Financially and physically and emotionally, it just pretty much wiped me out.
Right now, these workers are bargaining for sick leave, family-friendly scheduling, and the ability to meet the cost of living. How will a better contract affect our communities throughout Puget Sound?
I think 20,000 workers for UFCW are critical to our community, at the front lines of food safety. They're parents, they're friends, they are part of our community family. In an area that is growing economically as rapidly as ours, it's important that every employee share in the success of the companies or the employers that they work with. I mean, when you have a company that says to its employees, we're going to give you 3 days notice before you know your work schedule, that's all they're asking for.
It's important that people be able to earn a living wage in order to fully participate, be part of our community. We don't want our city to be only a city of the very rich and the very poor. We want it to be a city of everybody.
When a company has record profits, they've got to look in the mirror. And when they look in the mirror, they'll see their employees. UFCW is fighting for the American dream and American hopes.
Well, with that introduction, I would like to introduce you to our panel, and I'm going to introduce them individually and then ask them a question. We'll talk as a group later on in the program. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, to my immediate right. She's the executive director of MomsRising.org, which is an organization that brings millions of people together who share the common concern about the need to build a more family-friendly society. Kristen, you've said in the past that the surest way into poverty is to have children. What do you mean by that?
One of the deepest, most untalked about secrets in our country is that right now a full quarter of American families with children under 6 are living in poverty. We don't talk about this. This is something we need to daylight and we need to talk about more often. In fact, having a baby in our country is a leading cause of a poverty spell, which is a time when your income slips below what's needed for basic living expenses like food and rent. Why? This is so loud. Why does that happen? One of the reasons why this happens is that we lack the basic social support structures that many families enjoy. We have a modern economy where more than 3/4 of mothers are now in the labor force. In fact, my son, who's 10, has a joke about this. He told me I always have to slip a joke in somewhere. And I said, okay, what is it? He said, why did the mother cross the road? I said, why? He said, to get to work like 72% of other mothers. We're all working. What we don't have is a support structure that has come forward from the 1950s. We're stuck in the 1950s with our support structure. And it's time for us to catch up with modern realities. The policies that we're lacking are policies like health care for everyone. 1 in 9 children in our country don't have any health care coverage. In fact, health care, as we'll see, is a leading cause of bankruptcy. Most other industrialized nations have some form of universal health care. Policies like paid sick days are missing. 46% of the American workforce has no paid sick days whatsoever. And in fact, we are, of the 20 top economies, we are only one without any paid sick days. A big policy that we're missing is paid family leave, which is paid leave after the birth of a new baby or for a serious medical illness. In fact, the United States is one of only 4 countries in a Harvard study of over 170 countries that doesn't have some form of paid leave. We joined Papua New Guinea, Lesotho, and Liberia with a dubious distinction. Right here in Washington State, thanks to the leadership of the Washington State Legislature and to many people who are in our audience, Representative Steve Conway, you might want to raise your hand. I saw Senator Adam Klein, Senator Brown, who can't be here, Representative Speaker Chalk, Representative Mary Lou Dickerson, and Senator Kaiser, we now became the second state in the country to have this important policy. It just passed. It's not in place yet. But we are making strides. This is critically important because paid family leave decreases infant mortality by about 25%. We rank 37th in childhood mortality according to the World Health Organization. I think we're farther down according to the CIA. John can tell you about that. And also it's important because policies like this lower the poverty rates of families. Countries with family-friendly policies and programs in place, like paid family leave, like subsidized child care, like health care, don't have the wage gaps between mothers and non-mothers we do here. Moms in our country make 73 cents to a man's dollar. Women with children, wait a minute, I'm getting it mixed up. Women without children, 90 cents to a man's dollar. Women with children, 73. And single moms make the least at about 60 cents. When you have these policies and programs in place, you close the wage gap and you don't have as many women and children in poverty. What's really important today is that unions are on the front line of this battle for family-friendly policies, on the front line with the contract negotiations, on the front line with battling against what some people are calling the great risk shift, away from corporate responsibility, away from community responsibility, and toward the individual. And what Moms Rising does, and what many of you are doing, is say that when this many people are having the same problem at the same time, we have a societal issue that needs to be addressed, and not an epidemic of personal failing, or any other microphone failing. And with that, I give it back to Pepper.
Let me ask you one question. A lot of people hear that, and then the inevitable answer comes, well, we just can't afford that. How do you respond to that?
I respond that we cannot afford not to support our families. All of the policies that we've talked about, first of all, we are the only top economy that doesn't have these policies and programs in place, so we are competing in a global market against countries that are investing in their children, against countries that are investing in their futures, and these children, these families, are the economic engine of our future. So if we don't make the investment now, we will pay later. And you can show all the way through, you know, for the lowest amount I've heard is that for every $1 invested now, you get $7 back later, and that's in terms of child care. So we'll get it back later.
Thank you. We're also honored to have with us today Pramila Jayapal, an activist and writer who has worked to build power within immigrant communities. She stood up for working families in the United States and internationally, and is founder and executive director of Hate Free Zone Washington. So my question for you, Pramila. America has, since its inception, been a beacon of light to the world. The Statue of Liberty is possibly our country's most recognizable icon. From New York Harbor, it seems to broadcast the dream that this is the place that you're going to get your fair share of prosperity. What do you think about that promise? Do you think it's still being sent to immigrant populations all over the world?
Well, let me actually just start by saying this is amazing to look out. I think this tells us right here, looking at this big audience, that this is a critical issue. So thank you for giving us your Sunday. We really appreciate it. It is an incredibly powerful promise. And it is, as you said, it's on the Statue of Liberty, it's enshrined in our Constitution. It's what we put out there as the great American dream, not just internationally to immigrants who are coming here from all over the world, but right here in the United States. We're always talking about the American dream. But the reality is that, you know, and immigrants in particular are coming here from very desperate situations sometimes, both economic and political. And I know a man from Djibouti who walked for 3 days across deserts in bare feet to get here. And so it's clear that people are coming because they believe that something better is possible. They believe that they're going to have a better life, that their kids are going to have a better life. And really, right here, the reality is that's not true. Let me just ask a question. How many of you in the audience believe that you are better off today than you were 10 years ago or 15 years ago? Just look around. Just look around at this for a minute. There's a few hands in the audience. I would say maybe a dozen, but I can't see that well. So how many of you believe that you're better off than your parents were? How many of you believe, more people, how many of you believe that your kids are going to be better off than you are? Not very many. So when you think about what are the economics, I think one of the pieces is what is the actual economic situation, whether it's for immigrants or for people who are already here. But the other is, what are our hopes and dreams? What do we actually believe is possible? Do we believe that the life that we want to have is possible? And clearly the burden of a shrinking middle class and the burden of people who are reaching to get into the middle class but can't get there does fall disproportionately on people of color. The median income in King County for Native Americans and African Americans and Latinos is half of the median income of people who are white. It's also true that about half of African American, Native American, and Latino kids in high school are not graduating. It's also true that if you read the paper this morning, Delridge, you look at the what's happening in Delridge, that the majority of people who are getting pushed out of the only last affordable places in Seattle are tending to be disproportionately people of color. So I think that the promise is very real, but it also creates an expectation and an accountability, which I think is why all of us are here today, to really answer this question. Last point, last night I told somebody that I was going to be here at a panel called Is Puget Sound Losing the Middle Class? And they said to me, that's going to be a short panel. The answer is yes. So I think it's pretty clear to a lot of people that this is actually, the evidence is right here and it's real and we need to do something about it.
Thank you, Pramila. I'd also like to welcome John DeGraff, a man I've heard about for many years, doing wonderful work. He's the National Coordinator of Take Back Your Time, an organization challenging overwork and time pressures on Americans' working families. He's a public television documentary producer with more than 100 local and national awards and producer of the Motherhood Manifesto. John, you talk about time poverty and work-family balance. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, I wanted to say, again, like Pramila mentioned, it's just wonderful to see so many people out here. My son said, you know, what are you going? I mean, nobody's going to be there. Felix is pitching. And it's on Channel 11, you know. But you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be like Pepper. I wanted to be a sociologist, so I studied sociology. And I remember back in 1968, I was taking a sociology class at the University of Wisconsin, and we were talking about what the big social problems were going to be at the end of the 20th century. And you know, the big one, they said, the thing that we sociologists were all going to have to help solve was the fact that with automation and cybernation, this computer revolution that we're all now embedded in, that we would have a 15 to 20-hour work week. We'd have 7 to 10 weeks of vacation a year, and we would all have, I'm not making this up, I promise, we would all have so much leisure time on our hands, we wouldn't know what to do with it. I remember a song of that period, some of you probably remember it too. It was called The Times They Are Changing. And we thought the times were changing. We thought the times were going to get better. We thought that the people who were poor were going to get less poor, that fairness and all these things were going to happen. But the times changed all right. They changed in precisely the opposite direction. And we got the rise of a conservative revolution that said, let's roll back all the gains, all the things that we got through the Roosevelt administration and through the New Deal and the Fair Deal and the Great Society. They said, let's turn back all that, let's privatize, let's deregulate, let's cut taxes on the richest Americans all over. They said it was going to trickle down to the rest of us. Now the president calls it the ownership society. I call it the you're on your ownership society. And things didn't trickle down. We know what happened. They gushed up. The gap between rich and poor became wider and wider than ever, and it is reflected in the harder time that all families in the middle are having and at the bottom in making ends meet, and the increased work time that they need to put in to make that happen. So now families are spending an average of 500 hours more each year in the workplace, and they are feeling constant pressure all the time to do that and to make ends meet. On the other side, we have families who can't get enough work. Many of the grocery workers and other people who who are in part-time jobs who have to work 2 or 3 of these part-time jobs. And then they're told, as was mentioned in the video, well, you've got 3 days to figure out your schedule. You've got 3 days to figure out daycare. You've got 3 days to figure out all of these kinds of things. No affordable child care. We have 1/3 of families in this country with young children who have tag team marriages, one parent working one shift, the other working another shift, because they can't afford daycare. And we are seeing the gap widening appreciably between rich and poor in this country, so that back in 1970, we were about in the middle in terms of the gap between rich and poor among industrial countries. Today, we have the widest gap by far. The middle class is certainly disappearing in the United States as a country, and the same kind of thing is being reflected here in Puget Sound. We need to change this.
John, let me ask you a little bit of a... I think that's for all of you, all 3 of you. John, let me ask you a small follow-up question. You know, Puget Sound's always been pretty smug about our quality of life. So how do we stack up against those national statistics you've given?
Well, in some ways, it seems like we have an even wider gap. I mean, we've gotten a lot of wealth here, and some people have done very, very well through the new industries that have come up here. But part of the result of that is increasing prices, and we see that in the housing market and other places, so that we also have more and more people compared to other places in the country who are finding it harder to stay here, finding it harder to stay in the city, and so forth. We've got a lot to do.
Kristen, how does this relate to the kind of focus of your work? How does John's and Pramila's conversation inform the policy priorities that you're interested in?
Well, certainly we resonate quite a lot with John's analysis and with John's take on the issues, and really with John's "you're on your ownership." What happens with mothers is that we talk a lot about the need for a work-family balance, for the Balancing Act, as if it was our problem, that we can't keep up with the multiple roles of demands that we have with balancing work and family. Instead of looking at the structural supports in our society that are needed, things like paid family leave, paid sick days, paid vacation, health care for all, open flexible work hours, excellent child care, and realistic and fair wages. We need to look at the structure of support and get away from the "you're on your ownership" society and back to a society where, when many people are having a shared problem at the same time, we can look at shared solutions and not at an epidemic of personal failings. So we very much agree with John and with Pramila.
Pramila, do you think the people that you are most trying to represent believe that they will be middle class someday? Do they still have the hope of the American dream? And is that realistic if they do?
I think many of them still have that hope because it's what brought them here and it's what drives them. So to lose it would actually mean the death of everything that they've been struggling for. So the reality, though, I think there are increasing numbers. I mean, most of the people I work with are working 2 jobs, minimum. Most of the people I work with, if they have a roof over their heads, are worried that they're going to be able to keep that roof over their heads. And you know, to me, it's, I think one of the things that's been toughest for immigrants who come here is that they no longer have those family supports that they've had at home. And so the extended family that takes care of kids when they're sick, those kinds of things that you rely on your community for don't exist here. So it's very difficult. And I think one of the things that happens is that it's almost like we move into a mentality of scarcity versus abundance. You know, if you're afraid that you're not going to be able to have a job, or you're not going to be able to have a roof over your head, or you're not going to be able to send your kids to school, I think we start to get very focused on the me world, and we don't have this sense of the social collective, or the social good, or the social compact, which we have had in this country that really led and fueled the growth of the middle class. And that's what we need to get back to, is something where we all say, look, we're going to fight for everybody to have good wages, to have health care, to have a good education, because if everyone is doing well, the society as a whole is doing well, and I will do well.
John, some people would say that this is just the inevitable result of a highly industrialized capitalism. Do you think that's true? Are there any other countries that are doing better than we are at the concerns that the three of you have voiced?
Well, you know, I'm involved with a new campaign. It's a new national campaign called What's the Economy For Anyway? And one of the things that we're doing with that is we're actually crunching some of the numbers and comparing how well the United States does versus, for example, the Western European nations in all kinds of quality of life and equity and environmental measures. And, you know, it's pretty amazing. I'm just going to go down the list of a few of the areas in which the United States ranks last or next to last when compared to European countries. Number one, healthcare. Number two, poverty, the highest rates. Leisure time, the least amount. Mental health, the highest rates of anxiety and depression. Income and pension security, the least. Longevity, the lowest. Infant mortality, the highest. Obesity, the biggest. Gap between rich and poor, the widest. Murder, number one. Incarceration, number one by a factor of about 10 to 1. 2.3 million Americans behind bars. Unheard of anywhere else. Even personal and press freedom, we now rank last, and we rank last in social mobility. If you are born poor in this country, you have less chance than in any other industrial country to end up in the wealthier part of society. Now, we'll claim we can't do these kind of things those other countries do because, number one, we say, oh, we're an entrepreneurial country. We're a country of self-employed and small businesses. Well, guess what? The U.S. has the fewest percentage of people who are self-employed or who work for small businesses of any Western industrial country. We claim that we can't do these things and compete in the global economy, that we've got to send the jobs to China. We can't do these things and invest. But the fact is that American companies who claim this can't be done are investing the bulk of their money precisely in the countries that are doing the right thing. You know, we invest 5 times as much money each year in Germany as we do in China, even though Germany pays the highest wages in the world. And we make 23 times as much profit each year, believe it or not, in Switzerland as we do in India. We are investing in these European countries that are doing the right thing, that are taking care of their workers, and our companies are making money and they're doing well. So what have we got? The biggest gross domestic product, the grossest domestic product, if you will, the highest Dow Jones average, the most billionaires, but we need to share the success so that everybody has a chance.
Pramila, let me have you hone in on one of John's depressing points. And that is this gap, this huge gap between the have and the haves not, the diminishing middle class we have. What do you think are some of the outcomes as this gap becomes bigger and more obvious in our society?
I think it's all of these things, actually, that John has mentioned. You're going to have social unrest. You're not going to have as much productivity. Because, you know, for example, with the grocery store owners, the fact is that workers need to be happy and taken care of in order to provide the customer service to the customers who are going to come and give the money, right? So that's what it's about. That, you know, the reason I'm here, because honestly, when I was first asked to be here, I thought, really? Immigrant rights, human rights on the stage? But the reason I'm here is because that is what it's about. It's about human rights, it's about human dignity, and it's about us as customers standing up to say, we will not accept anything less. We need to share the success. Otherwise, we're going to have a society that is not productive, that's not happy, that's not successful, and that's ultimately not competitive.
Kristen, from your perspective, what do you think this issue of not sharing the success costs? Who does it cost most?
It costs all of us most. And as Pramila just said, it really also costs the companies a lot of money. It's something that we don't talk about. Study after study shows that when you offer employees flexible work options, when you offer employees benefits, they are more likely to to stay with the company. So the company has lower retraining costs, they have lower recruitment costs. They also have higher productivity with the employees, so they make money that way. So we focused a lot on how this hurts women and families, which it certainly does. We know that women are 44% less likely to be hired than women, mothers are 44% less likely to be hired than women without children, and are offered $11,000 lower starting salaries, and we see that throughout the business world. So we see a lot of problems with mothers who have to quit needed jobs because of inflexibility, but the company also pays a price too because they are losing those employees. So it is really time to share the wealth, both with children, with women, with men, with all workers, and the company in the end, and our global economy will do better.
Tell me how that works. Why would mothers be being paid less? Are they given different kind of hours, or what happens where they get discriminated against?
That is the big question. There have been a lot of studies about whose fault is it that this does happen. And really what's happening is we can take Walmart, for example, because they're the nation's largest private employer. This is a good crowd to mention Walmart. So as you know, they're the nation's largest private employer, and across the board there's a class action lawsuit right now because with 1.6 million women, they pay women less in every job category across the board, and women are promoted less in every category across the board. And we know that the majority of those women are mothers because 82% of American women do have children by the time they're 44. So we know what's going on is really a motherhood issue. Despite the fact, and this is where it becomes clear, that those people, those women, those mothers have greater seniority and better performance reviews. So we've got a lot of motherism still out there, which is something that we're addressing right now with Moms Rising, because we really feel that not only is there discrimination against mothers, which is very important that we need to address this. In fact, mothers are taken off of the management track, according to a Cornell University study, much faster for fewer late days than women without children. So we have harsher standards for women with children than those without. But also for all people who are dealing with family responsibilities, we have a multi-pronged issue with the lack of family-friendly policies and programs, the pulling away of benefits, the risk shift toward the individual and away from corporate responsibility, and then we have outright discrimination, all coming together to create a huge problem for all of us, the middle class heavily included.
Well, you know, we do a lot of pious talk about children's welfare, but I haven't seen anything here that really speaks to taking care of our nation's children. Is there any sense of movement about where we should be concentrating to help families, to help moms, mother, to help families have a time to take a breath so that they can work and be good parents? Any of you?
I do.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
With Moms Rising, we have an agenda that is much like the union's agenda, and that is it's based on mother, the acronym mother, M-O-T-H-E-R. So the platform for children also is to make the family healthy, which is M for maternity, paternity leave, so that people have time to spend with their newborn children. That's paid family leave. O is for open, flexible workplaces. T is for television and other after-school programs. Because right now 40,000 kindergartners are home alone each day after school. They're about this tall, and a total of 14 million kids between kindergarten and K through 12 are home alone after school. H is healthcare for all, E is excellent childcare, and R is realistic and fair wages. And there will be a quiz after this to see who can remember.
Well,
Pepper.
let me ask you
Can
all.
I add to that for 1 second?
Go ahead.
I just want to add a very brief
at it.
study just came out last year. I remember earlier this year, I remember being in Mobile, Alabama, giving a talk, and I was looking at the local paper. You know, the big important news is always on the front page, so I looked at the front page, and the front page news was that Alabama was shut out in the finals of the American Idol competition. And I looked for the news that doesn't really matter, and that was on the back page of the Mobile paper, probably the Seattle paper as well. And it said, U.S. Britain ranked last in child welfare. And it showed the survey of all the results and how we are right down at the bottom when it comes to everything involving how well kids are doing. It's staggering, and yet we paid almost no attention to that at all. In Britain, it created huge public outcry People were screaming, how could we have let things get so bad? In the United States, we barely blinked.
I just wanted to comment on that question too. I think in addition to what Kristen said, part of what we believe is that unions, outside of the work that we do, for example, on federal policy reform around immigration issues or immigrant rights issues, part of the reason that we work very closely with the labor movement is because we believe that the labor movement is actually an institutional structure to prevent poverty, to ensure good wages, to ensure health benefits, and that those are the things that families need in order to take care of their kids. If a mother does not have a wage that allows her to put food on the table, the kid is going to be the one that suffers. And so one example of, we're really pushing both to make sure that we're supporting our union allies and also to hold unions accountable to the issues that are coming up in our communities. And recently there was a great win with Unite Here on the Weston Workers contract negotiation, which was really a wonderful process for us to be involved in. It really wasn't just a union issue, it really was a community issue, and we were able to get significant immigrant rights protections into that bargaining contract as well. So I think part of what we're going to have to do is figure out how we all come together, just as we are here today, to make sure that as we're addressing these issues, we're really looking across the broad spectrum of what's possible and what we're going to have to do to hold ourselves and the structures that we're supporting accountable.
Let me ask you this question. A lot of people look at the grocery workers or other people who are struggling for fair wages and family supports, and they say, gee, that's too bad, and they go on with their lives. So since everybody operates from self-interest, I'd like any of you or all of you, but briefly because we have more things to go on to tell me what you would say, how losing the middle class, how these affected communities affect other people, the larger population of this area. What's in it for everybody if people's incomes and supports rise?
I think it's about going back to a rising tide lifts all boats versus a rising tide lifts all yachts. I mean, I think it's really... It's about, can I really wall myself off in my little home and believe that everything is going to be okay for me if the rest of the world is collapsing outside? And I really think that there are moral issues to draw people back to. There are spiritual issues. The country of Bhutan has something called the gross national happiness. It's really about not just the gross national product, but what does it take for us to be healthy and happy? Because as human beings, that's what we all want. And I think once people connect with those values, that most people, if you can get out of this mentality of scarcity and kind of feeling under pressure all the time, and that you can understand that if somebody else does better, that means that you're probably going to do better too. In the long run, if we're all doing better, I'm going to do better too. And I think it's about appealing to values. I really do.
Okay. In countries where the gap is wider between rich and poor, we see much less healthy societies. There's a very clear connection between the health of a society and of all people in that society with the fairness of that society. We see, for example, that wealthy Americans are no more healthy than poor Europeans, and that when you look at all Europeans, they are considerably more healthier. They're living 3 to 4 years longer than we are. Equity actually makes everybody healthier.
Thank you. Those are great remarks. What I want to do now is take a look at this at the individual level. We have some personal statements from some workers and some facts that I think help amplify the issues that the panel so ably addressed. So after each frame, we'll talk a little bit about what this slide represents. See the first one up there. It says, my mom's family had 12 kids and her dad raised them all on his salary. My mom raised my 3 brothers and me on her teacher's salary. I'm having a tough time supporting myself alone on a grocery worker's wage. This is from Michael Ashlock, who's a grocery worker in Seattle. And the statistic I have that one of you might want to comment on vis-a-vis the slide is that in 2004, the median income for a man in his 30s was $35,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's 12% less than his father's income 30 years ago in 1974. Anyone want to comment on the import of that? Any of the panelists?
I mean, I think it's really clear that, and it went to the question I asked at the beginning of, you know, who feels like they're better off than your parents do. I think we all want to believe in the present and the future for ourselves and for our kids, and that's getting harder and harder, as you can see by the statistics.
Well, the second slide comes from the person I think who we heard a little bit more, heard from her earlier in the video. When I went through through cancer treatment was the toughest thing I'd ever done. My coworkers wanted to donate their sick leave to me so I wouldn't lose income. My employer wouldn't let them. Cancer cost me a lot. My employer made it worse. Sharon Russell, who's a meat wrapper in Puyallup, Washington. So I think someone else mentioned medical bills lead about 1 million Americans into bankruptcy each year. What can we do to not have this kind of awful situation affect anybody in this country?
Well, the sad thing in one sense is that Congress has found its own solution to this. There won't be nearly so many Americans declaring personal bankruptcy because of their medical bills this year because they changed the bankruptcy laws. They just make it harder to declare bankruptcy. But this is the fact. Up until this year, for the past 8 years, more Americans have declared personal bankruptcy every year than have graduated from college each year. More. And half of those bankruptcies have been the result of people who could not meet medical expenses.
And where this comes in with the middle class is actually very important, because unless we're Bill Gates, none of us are safe from this type of health-related bankruptcy. A full 76% of bankruptcies that happen due to healthcare issues happen to people who had jobs when their illness started. So what we're looking at here is that in a society where we have job-connected healthcare, we have people who have serious illness who fall off the ability to have their insurance paid for, and then we have bankruptcies and we have a downward spiral into poverty that is often very hard to get out of.
It is a national scandal. Let's look at the next slide. I always thought I'd work hard, raise the kids, then retire when I could do things. When I could still do things. I've worked for Fred Meyer for 20 years. I'm retirement age, but I can't afford to retire. It's getting harder to do a 10-hour shift. Even so, I can't afford not to work. And that's Maggie Wentz, who's a retail worker in Everett. And the statistic I have supporting that says half of all American workers have no retirement security plan other than Social Security. And of course, they're telling us Social Security is something we can't depend on. What comments do you have on that?
You know, as I'm watching these slides, I'm thinking this is like a giant game of Monopoly. I mean, you know how in Monopoly, if you happen to get rich early, then you get to buy the expensive properties and put the hotels on the expensive places, and you just get richer and richer and richer. But if you don't, you slip behind, and it becomes harder. It's really hard to ever pull yourself up. And so with Social Security, with health care, with wages, it feels like we're in this giant slipping game of Monopoly where we're not on the winning side.
Well, and it also strikes me to your earlier remarks about if you start to have a huge group of people having no way to help themselves in old age, the rest of the country will in fact be involved in this situation.
That's right.
It's not going to stand alone. And the last slide is my mom works a lot, and she's a single parent. I know it's really hard on her. When she does have time off, it's like I'm going to wild waves. We saw that in the video. Madison Garcia, daughter of Miley Garcia, who's a grocery worker we heard from. So the statistic here is 45% of the children in Washington's low-income families have at least one parent working full-time year-round. It obviously isn't a cause, not working. We often hear that not working is the cause of children's impoverishment, but here is a working families. What do you think of this? Last comment, anyone?
It's important to remember that childcare in our country is extraordinarily expensive. For each child in childcare, the average cost is between $4,000 and $10,000 per year. If you're working federal minimum wage, which thank goodness we don't have here in Washington State, and you have 2 kids, you're spending more in childcare than you are bringing in more often than not. So looking at the structures that create this cycle of poverty, going back to my opening comments about the full quarter of children, of families with children under 6 living in poverty, where does that happen? It happens right here. It happens when you have a baby, you have to quit a needed job because you'd have to spend more on childcare than you'd make, and then you don't have health care because you don't have a job, and then your child gets sick, and then where are you in 10 years? You're still paying your medical bill and still trying to build up your resume. We have to fix our structure. We have to catch up with the rest of the world. We have to catch up with modern realities. We have to make sure that our families and our workers are having a solid ground to grow from, and that we as a society take on these issues together and not as a nation of individuals.
In a moment, we're going to hear the union perspective and catch up with what is happening with the grocery workers. But right now, I'd like to ask you if you have specific questions of our panel. We'd like you to write it down on a piece of paper, and it will be picked up, and we will pick some of them, probably not be able to pick all of them for the answer, as well as ask questions of the person I'm presently going to introduce you to, who is Steve Williamson. We've talked about how real change can be affected on the issues that affect workers and their families. And one solution named from our panel was simply bargaining a better work contract in a way to impact the lives of these workers immediately. So a close-up on that perspective of what's actually going on. I've asked to have Steve Williamson, UFCW Local 21's Strategic Campaigns Director here, and he's joining us on the stage now to help us understand that connection better. Welcome, Steve. I think a lot of people here know some of what you know, but most of us don't know all of it. So what are the real issues you're contending with in this bargaining session?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with this hope question. I think we've laid out pretty clearly that, as I've been listening in the audience, that the middle class is disappearing here in the Puget Sound. But I guess I want to give 3 examples of why, in fact, we ought to be hopeful. Clear-cut reasons why I think we don't have to lose the middle class here in the Puget Sound. And the first is, people talked about legislation. Sometimes it sounds a little pie in the sky, like changing the law. Well, you know, we did something in Washington State in 1998. We had an initiative, 688, that we were the first state in the nation to index the minimum wage to the rate of inflation. Now, the reason I want to say, when you're the first, by definition, that was a revolutionary act, and yet other states are following, and all of the consequences that people said at the time, that all these economic consequences, bad things to corporations were going to happen, haven't in fact happened, right? In fact, others are following our lead. So that gives some real hope that an idea that may not sound practical, or some people may poo-poo and say, well, how can we do that? We did it right here in Washington State, and others are following our lead. The second hopeful act, by definition, is collective bargaining. Because what else is collective bargaining? By definition, collective bargaining means not taking no for an answer. That's what you do. You sit down at the bargaining table, the other side says, well, we couldn't do that. And then you prove why they can, and you insist on it. And if you can see this photo here, you see our members, and it's actually 3 locals, 21, 81, and 44 of UFCW, at the bargaining table, listening carefully to management's reasons why they can't do it, and processing that, and then saying, yeah, but we still want that, and we actually think that the public supports us, and we think we deserve it, and they're not giving up. In fact, tomorrow this time, they'll be in bargaining with the employers. The third reason why I think we should be hopeful in the case of collective bargaining for grocery workers is, by definition again, the employers we're bargaining with, and we're talking Safeway, QFC, Fred Meyer's, and Albertsons, are all part of the Fortune 50. You've heard of the Fortune 500, the largest corporations? We're talking the Fortune 50, the creme de la creme. By definition, they have the most of everything and the most way that they can give the most means and resources to give back to the workers. So by definition, again, we can be very hopeful. But what we're looking for, and I think people said it really well, and I have my own little poll. I asked a few people here earlier about what they're fighting for. You know, even coming to this event today, people had to wait in the grocery industry till 6 p.m. Thursday to find out what their schedule was going to be for Sunday today. Now, that's not just for coming to this event. That's every week. That's for if you want to take your kids to the doctor. You don't know if you can do it on Tuesday or Wednesday or what you're going to do, or a school meeting, PTA, or participating in civic activities. That has to change. That doesn't cost them anything. Number two, sick leave. People don't get paid sick leave. So what do? They come to work sick. That's what they do. And that means they're handling your food as you go to the grocery store. Many of you will leave here. Think about your grocery worker in your mind, the people you know every day. And why should they be coming to work sick, handling your food? They should be staying home, getting better is what should happen. And then let's talk, let me just quickly, wages and benefits. When I asked a couple of workers in my little survey of about 8 people, I had 2 people who gave me clear examples, and I don't mean rhetorically, clear examples of how they were in danger and jeopardy of losing their homes. One because of health care issues. They've got 2 kids, and the health care benefits we have are not covering all the needs by far. Huge expenses they've got. And so the wages just are not keeping up, and the benefits either. So what we know about the employers, though, to get at this question and why we should be hopeful, the ones we're bargaining with, Safeway, QFC, Albertsons, Fred Meyers, are having record profits today. Record profits. Number 2, their market share is increasing. It's on the rise relative to all their competitors right now. And number 3, they're renovating their stores. If you go into Safeway, it's the Lifestyle or whatever it is, and it looks very nice in there. They're spending billions to renovate their stores. Now, I'm not saying they should not do that, but when I talk to the brother over here, he says to me, I feel cheated and I feel abandoned when I go to work every day and I see what they're doing to these stores and I see what I have to face in my life. So there's no question they have the wherewithal, and I guess the question I'd like to pose to you is, do you think that the grocery workers' future and their welfare is tied to yours? Raise your hand if you think that's true. Okay. And then I guess, how many people here are willing to help grocery workers make sure that they get a better deal so that we all get a better deal? All right. Now, do you have faith in yourself? Do you have faith in yourselves? If you have faith in yourselves that we can help grocery workers and we'll be better off, then by definition again, we're going to have a return of the middle class. And what I would define as middle class is that we're all this, what the panel said here, that my boat's rising with your boat. It's not about how much you make, but that we're all going up together as a society. How many people believe that we can take back the middle class and take back the notion that we're sticking together in the Puget Sound? Clap if you believe that.
We'd love to hear your questions. Steve will answer questions as well. So I will ask these generally, and then whoever thinks they've got a good take on it. So what does share the success mean then? What do we want, and what would it look like? Give me some feedback on that. Maybe you want to start, Steve.
Well, I think that share the success has a number of things to it. I mean, I'll just go back. My mother said to me when I was growing up, one of the first lessons was, I'm saying, I want, and she said, but you've got to share with that little boy over there because it's the right thing to do. And then she added, also, if you give some of yours to him, maybe he'll give some of his to you, and you'll both be better off. And, I think my mom was right. I think she was right then, and she's more right today. And I would say to the grocers, if they can find it through the bargaining committee that's going back to the table tomorrow to share what they've got, which was built on their work. Frankly, you go there because you get good customer service and these workers take care of you. That if they share that back, that they actually will do better too. And this notion of short-term gain for the shareholders is really short-sighted. It doesn't help them in the long term. I believe that very deep in my heart. that their long-term interests are in these current workers' interests now today.
Well,
I happened to talk with a gentleman a few days ago who makes a very great deal of money. And he told me that in fact, he pays a smaller percentage of his salary in taxes than his secretary does. He thinks that that's unfair. He thinks it's a crazy set of laws and a crazy set of policies and priorities in America today that have made that the case. And he actually wants to share the success and thinks we need to have policies to make that happen. And I do too.
No.
I was just going to say, first of all, that moms are always right, Steve. And say that as a mother of a 10-year-old. But I was just going to say that I was talking to one of the grocery workers right before the panel started, I think Vinod, and I said, how's the bargaining going? And he said, oh, it's always really tough to get money out of the people who have money. And it made me think that part of what we need to do, I think, to force this issue of sharing the success is make it harder for them to keep the money, right? So we've got to make it much harder for them if they keep the money and don't share the success than if they share the success.
Steve, this may sound like a naive question, but how could they not expect to feed back some of these record profits back into the employees? I know that's simple, but gee, you know.
Well, I guess that I've been in bargaining a lot, and I think from their side of the table, they believe that they will steer the company in a more profitable direction, and it will, in the end, you employees will do better, you folks will do better if we just are allowed to make all the decisions. And I think that that's what they really believe. I think that John laid out pretty clearly that things have been gushing towards them, so they've gotten some pretty good feedback, right, in terms of money. I mean, these folks are making millions and millions of dollars, and they're getting, you know, the incentives they get are for short-term profit gains. You know, the pay performance that CEOs get is like if you do well this year, then you get a big bonus. But what does that do well this year have to do with the long-term welfare of the company? Maybe nothing. In fact, it may be that they sold off a whole section of the company. I mean, it's just a matter of they've gotten rewarded the way our society is working today, and it's not working for workers. So what we've got to do is we've got to push back, and I think the great thing about the grocery industry is the consumers control everything, and everyone in here is a consumer.
Two more. Okay, here's an interesting question. I only have time for two, and then we have to move on. FDR proposed an economic Bill of Rights in 1944. Why don't we use that framework to lead the discussion and campaign about disparate wages in our area? Anyone want to address that? I mean, an economic Bill of Rights, a new frame about how people should be compensated.
I think that's starting to happen in other places. I think that is what we're trying to do, is reshape the debate and go back to some of the things that were proposed after the Depression. I mean, you know, I read somewhere that it's really great crises that bring us together. So after the Depression, there was a move for people to come together and figure out how we all get out of that situation together. And so I think the question goes to the right idea, which is we need a new way to think about what our gross national product, what our economic Bill of Rights, what our, you know, overall compact with human rights is. And part of what we're trying to do is shape that discussion now and put out there that these are all the things that we need. That when Steve mentioned, you know, your question about isn't it just natural that they would put money back into the workers, I think part of the problem is there's a tension between what corporations have to respond to for their shareholders versus what the actual good is. You know, when corporations were first licensed a long time ago, they actually had to show that there was a social good that they were fulfilling. That's no longer the case. Now you're responding just to your shareholders, and it's just immediate short-term profits versus the long-term good of society.
Well, maybe this okay. Good.
I would just add that we might apply some old lessons in a new way. So for instance, you know, during the 30s and 40s, it was mine workers, construction workers, steel workers, machinists, factory workers. They weren't just all of a sudden the middle class. It was because they unionized and fought back and collectively bargained that they became good jobs. That's what happened. Similarly, today, you see the campaigns for hotel workers, janitors, healthcare workers, security guards, and grocery workers. It's the unionization that's bringing those folks up. And there is a piece of legislation that's out there. It's called the Employee Free Choice Act. It's federal legislation that would make it easier for workers to collectively bargain and form a union. If you tie where our country's welfare has been for most working people to the level of unionization, it's clear when unions are stronger and workers are belonging to unions, everyone's doing better. So it's applying some old lessons in new ways.
You answered the other question I was going to ask you, which is from the audience, how important is community activism to raising the living standards of lower paid workers? So maybe you could take your thought and apply it a little bit to community activism as opposed to just union activism. What's the place of that in all of this?
I think that goes back to the how do we share success? What is shared success? Shared success comes out of shared solutions and people working together on common shared problems to get to those shared solutions. All of the issues that we've all talked about today, it does not take rocket science to solve. In fact, many of these issues have been policies waiting to be passed, gathering dust on shelves places for decades. We know the solutions, we know how to solve these problems, and we know that when great need arises, there can be citizen support and citizen will to work with our elected officials to change these policies, both through bargaining and through the legislative process and through the education process, as well as through cultural change. The issue to remain clear in all of our minds is that we actually do have the power to make changes. Here in Washington State, just this past year, we mentioned we passed paid family leave with the help of many wonderful people working together through a coalition effort. It can be done. And to follow up on that, the question is, how much worse does it have to get before we ourselves find it in ourselves to take that extra 5 minutes a week sometimes, if it's online organizing, or 5 hours a week, to get engaged and to take action? A full quarter of American families with children under 6, which I'm now saying for the 3rd time, live in poverty. How much worse does it have to get? We are there. We are ready to work for those shared solutions, and we are so excited that you're here today working with us.
Thank you.
Pepper,
We are.
I just wanted to add one quick thing, really quick. The other way is by the power of our vote. And that's what, to me, what community activism is about. I'm an activist. We've registered, my organization has registered 17,000 new immigrant citizens to vote in the last 18 months. We're going to be up at 30,000 by 2008. And these issues are what matter.
I'm glad you guys are on the right side.
Pepper?
We're coming to the end of our time.
Pepper?
And yes.
Can I add one cool point too?
Sure. Go ahead.
Sorry about that.
Be brief.
But I think the big question we all have to ask is the one that Kristen pointed out early. What does it cost us not to do these things? This is the essential question. When Canada went a couple of years ago from 6 months to 1 year of paid family leave at 55% of salary, and that's what they get in Canada, believe it or not. When they did that, they found that they saved so much money on children's health that they're now talking about going to 2 years of paid family leave. We have to think a little bit differently. We are paying in other ways for what we refuse to pay for and take care of to begin with. So we are paying half of the world's entire healthcare budget, and we have the worst health outcomes of any industrial country because we don't do things in the beginning and we don't do the right things.
I wonder when Canada is going to have this big problem of Americans sneaking over the border trying to get the Canadian way of life. One last thing, and then...
Just
I'm going to get killed.
On the question of community, the reason we have this forum today is because we in the labor movement know we can't do it on our own. It just doesn't happen. We have to be in close partnership with all of our community allies, and we also want to say on behalf of UFCW, we want to be there for your struggles as well because there are struggles.
Thank you. We are almost out of time. Before we close, please allow me to bring Miley Garcia and her 2 daughters up to the stage. You saw Miley in the video. She's been a grocery worker for over 20 years, and she is a member of the UFCW grocery bargaining team. Miley.
I'd just like to thank everyone for being here today. This is my daughter Phoebe and my daughter Madison. I'd like everyone that was featured in the video or in the pictures here today to please stand. Let's give them a round of applause. And at this time, I'd like everybody on the bargaining committee who will be with me tomorrow to please stand. We will be sitting together facing people from Safeway, Albertsons, Fred Meyer, QFC, and the independents. I'd like to thank you, and we're going to be strong and make them share the success.
The members of UFCW Locals 21, 44, and 81 are honored that everybody took time from their busy day and their busy schedules to help us ask the question, is Puget Sound losing its middle class? No one will win their fair share of any industry's success without the support of alliances that run deep in our communities and which the panel have so articulately illustrated. Please note the list in the program of organizations that stand by grocery workers. I would like to thank Kristen Rao-Finkbeiner of MomsRising.org, Pramila Jayapal of Hate Free Zone Washington, John DeGraff of Take Back Your Time, and Steve Williamson for helping us. And I have a few suggestions here for you as you leave this hall fired up, I think. I think that's what I can hear. First of all, it would be great if you would go to www.sharethesuccess.org and sign up for email updates and stay involved in this campaign that calls grocery employers to help share the success, to share the successes we've talked about economically. There are also yard signs outside the lobby as you exit the building. Take one and show your support for grocery workers by posting it near a Safeway, Albertsons, QFC, or Fred Meyer. When you go, they're right out there, we've got plenty of them. When you go shopping, tell the person behind the counter that you're behind them. And tell the store managers that they need to share the success.